everyone, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, March 23rd, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Bob Blumenfield and Councilmember Mike Bonin. And we have a quorum. We're ready to begin. Members, I'd like to propose items 7, 8, 9, and 10 as consent items. And if there's no questions or concerns about those items, then we'll go ahead and those will be deemed approved on consent. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Sorry, members, there's a card on item number 9, so we'll hold that till the end of the agenda. 7, 8, and 10. There being no objection, will be deemed approved. The closed session items number 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're going to hold on the desk for the moment, and that brings us to item number 6.
Item number 6 is the City Administrative Officer reports relative to the third financial status report, the media report. There's an addendum on file as well.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, this is FSR Day, and in keeping with our past practice, what I'd like to ask for is a brief report on the FSR. Then I'll ask members to submit which departments they will be directing questions to. And if your department is not on that list, we will thank you and give you your opportunity to go back to your office. So, but first, let's get an overview of the FSR, and by the time we're done with that, I expect we'll have our other two members as well.
Good afternoon, members of this committee. I'm Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. Before you is the mid-year financial status report for the current fiscal year. The report recommends approximately $133 million in appropriations, transfers, and other budgetary adjustments. Also on file is our addendum, which makes technical corrections, includes additional items that came to our attention after the release of the mid-year, and other adjustments that need to be made as a result of separate actions that were taken relative to the mid-year in Council last week. This FSR identifies approximately $72.41 million year-end shortfall, largely as a result of liability claim expenditures resulting from unanticipated settlements and increased police sworn overtime use. The increase in the projected liability claims expenditures is mainly attributed to attorney conflict panel-related cases. Also, the Bureau of Street Services is expected to incur costs for the pavement preservation program, for which funds are budgeted in the unappropriated balance as opposed to the department's operational budget. The $72 million year-end shortfall is based on expenditures through the end of December and is summarized in Table 1 of our report. Our report also identifies approximately $18 million in non-departmental savings, which are recommended for transfer to the unappropriated balance reserved for economic uncertainties. These funds are available to partially offset the projected year-end deficit. Savings are identified from the Human Resource Benefits Fund in the amount of $14 million. There's $3 million identified in the unappropriated balance petroleum account and $1 million in the unappropriated balance outside council account. The report also highlights changes in our budget balancing assumptions. A major assumption of the city's current year budget balancing strategy assumed that the police department would stay within their $70 million sworn overtime budget. And this was to be accomplished by implementing sworn overtime control measures. These measures were expected to generate as much as $26.4 million in sworn overtime savings. However, based on current estimates, the total anticipated savings are no longer projected, and the savings are now projected to be $16.34 million less than the original target of $26 million. It is unlikely that the police department can offset the $16 million deficit strictly with overtime control measures, without significantly increasing the banked overtime liability. As a result, we can no longer rely on these internal efforts alone to offset the police department's sworn overtime shortfalls. Therefore, a $13.57 million reserve fund appropriation is recommended to offset a portion of the sworn overtime deficit. Our other budget balancing solutions identified in this report include the transfer of approximately $17.9 from the UB Reserve for Economic Uncertainties from various departments, mainly its $15 million to the fire department, to offset their shortfall. A transfer of $16.17 million from various other accounts in the unappropriated balance. Appropriations from the Bureau of Street Services to the Police Department, and a $14.41 million reserve fund appropriation. And again, that's mainly to the Police Department. The culmination of these actions reduced the year-end shortfall to $22 million. After accounting for an $8.3 million reserve fund appropriation to the liability claims account that took place via separate council action, the remaining year-end deficit is further reduced to $14.44 million. Due to various uncertainties, it is difficult to predict whether this remaining shortfall of $14.4 million will actually occur. This office will continue to monitor projected surpluses and deficits and provide recommendations for offsetting this shortfall in the year end. Regarding revenue, to date, our 14-15 revenue through January is $17.4 million above planned receipts, which represents approximately 52.4% of the total adopted general fund revenue budget of $5.14 billion. Regarding the reserve fund, with the mid-year recommended actions and other pending recommendations, the reserve fund continues to be above policy level at 6.54%. After accounting for the budget stabilization, the percent goes up to 7.8%. While the 6.54% reserve fund is less than the previous FSR, it is still above policy level. Our report also identifies major issues of concern that may adversely impact the city. We have previously identified and been tracking pension litigation, the Willits case, and Ardon cases. In this FSR, we're now including the Independent Living Center of Southern California, which is a case with potential liability of in excess of $5 million. In this FSR, we are also identifying the new DWP litigation, and this is involving the DWP power revenue transfer to the city. As you may be aware, the lawsuit alleges that the power revenue fund transfer to the general fund violates the state constitution. It also alleges that the transfer is not attributable to costs incurred by DWP for electric service and is therefore a tax requiring voter approval. While the settlement is not anticipated to occur this year, we'll continue to report as additional information becomes available. The DWP and the city attorney are in the process of reviewing the summons and preparing a written response pursuant to LA's Superior Court procedures. We are available to answer any other questions that you may have on this report.
All right. Thank you very much. What was that reserve fund percentage again?
6.54%.
Thank you. Always bears hearing twice. Members, any general questions before we get to departmental issues? Mr. Kress?
Well, it's probably more of a departmental issue, but it seems like we always have a problem with LAPD and sometimes fire going over budget, especially relating to overtime. Is there no way for us to actually budget a real amount and stick with it, as opposed to always budgeting a different amount and then going over it?
This is Ben Stout, the CEO. I think that's precisely why the decision was made to include some language in the agreement that is up for a vote of the council in the PPL agreement. It just so that you know, what was budgeted for overtime this year was only $15 million in the department, and that stems from the prior practice of allowing them to use a bank system that increased, obviously, the bank for overtime at a cost of over $100 million. I think going forward, the intent of the city is to budget what is a reasonable expectation of what the overtime hours used will be as part of the budget process.
And so we will actually make a more serious effort to come up with a real figure and to get the department to stick to it.
Yes, I think it's unfair for the to have the departments accountable for a number that isn't really the right number for them to be held up against. In this case, like I stated earlier, they only received $15 million in overtime as part of their budget, which is why over the course of this fiscal year we've had to make transfers to really account for the hours that they're using.
Okay, fair enough.
Mr. Blumenfield.
What kind of general question? You said the revenues, the projected revenues are a little higher than expected, is that right? For the,
At this point in time,
at this point in time, and then so when we're looking at, just to,
higher than planned.
higher than planned, when we're looking at the deficits that we're looking at in terms of the shortfall, it's based on what was planned, not what the revenue's been taken in, is that correct?
Yes, the 17.4 million is basically through January.
I'm sorry, is what?
It's through January.
What is 17.4 million? That's what we're above.
We are above plan
Right.
through January.
But that doesn't factor into, when we're looking at where we are in terms of our projected shortfall or our deficit for this period, it's based on what was planned, not what was the revenue anticipated, right?
On the deficit portion or the shortfalls we identify, it's solely based on appropriations. So it's really appropriations above what was budgeted. The revenue component doesn't really get factored into the budget situation until the year-end FSR when we have when we need to make a call as to where we think the budget will end with regard to the revenue.
Great. I just wanted to sort of make sure we're doing apples to apples in terms of comparing the planned numbers versus what's coming in at this point versus not including the additional revenues, because that's what we'll factor in at the end.
That's right.
Great.
Anything else, members, before we get to the departments? By the way, what have the trends been on the gross receipts tax?
Okay, I'll defer to my colleague, Melissa Krantz.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Just, I'm flipping through my chart pages here. I wanted
Yes.
to find out what the trends have been with gross receipts tax. We have 17
You know, right now it's too early to
above
call because
projections on our revenues, and I was wondering what portion of that was attributable to gross receipts
it's,
tax.
okay, Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. Right now it's too early to call business tax. The receipts are due January 1st. Of course, you have some leeway before it's actually due, before finance starts considering it late. So right now, we're still having an upward trend. We usually have some level off before we can call whether or not we're ahead of budget, and we're not at that point right now.
Okay.
Probably in April, closer to when the mayor's proposed budget comes out.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, members, any other general questions? All right, we get to our favorite part of the FSR meeting, when members provide me with the names of the departments you would like to ask questions of, and then everybody else gets to leave. So, Mr. Blumenfield.
LAPD.
Okay. Mr. Englander? Fire? Okay. That's it? Mr. Kress?
Finance?
Finance? And DOT. Okay, and I'd like to add to that city attorney and yeah, Just city attorney. Okay, so that leaves us with, just make sure my list is correct, LAPD, fire, finance, city attorney, planning, and DOT. Anything else? No? Thank you all very much. We appreciate your coming down. Thank you for your good work on this FSR. David. If you could keep the celebration down a little bit, we do have work that we need to do in here, so thank you. All right, why don't we go ahead and start with LAPD. Oh, yeah.
And I thought you were going to give me a gift.
No. We wanted to see you one last time.
We didn't hear it at first, so we thought we were had our fingers crossed.
No.
Sandy
You
Jo
know that
MacArthur,
would never be. It wouldn't be an FSR without hearing from LAPD.
Sandy Jo MacArthur Police Department.
Laura Luna Police Department.
So maybe before we go to Mr. Blumenfield's questions, if you could just give some overview on the overtime situation in response to Mr. Kretz's earlier inquiry, because we'd like to hear the department's perspective. on this.
Yes. We have actually been working really closely with the CAO office to get a realistic number, and we've been trending over the last 5 years, so we have what we believe is a realistic number. This year, as you know, right after the budget, additional money started to come our way because of the mayor's agreement in terms of funding overtime. In our budget, we had $15 million for reimbursable and FLSA monies, and then there was a decision made during union negotiations that didn't transpire until just recently to put $70 million into our budget last year. When we met with the CAO, our concern was
For the record, it was more than just the mayor's decision, by the way.
No, I apologize. It's everybody's decision at this table. You all, yes. And what would an FSR meeting be without me being corrected? But when we met with the CAO, we were concerned at the time that we needed $85 million last year, but what was available was 70. And so we are really actually, with this additional monies that they're giving us in the FSR, we're very, very close to what we believe is the realistic number. And our goal for this year's budget is to bring to the table, when we do our budget to all of you, a realistic number. The bit of our shortfall really came because of the 20%, what has been called the 20%ers, when that was resolved, and that was some of the shortfall. So we feel that we're working towards the number, as you say, sir, what is the sweet spot, so to speak, and what will happen going forward in this budget. We believe we're going to be where we need to be for next year. At least that's what we're hoping to work with the CAO and the mayor's office for the budget that comes to all of you.
Is there any way that we can actually hold the LAPD to a figure?
Well,
I know based on past practice, we could come up with a figure that you think is the right figure, and then if you're $20 million over it at the end of the year, we just pay it and move on as if nothing had happened. Do we actually have any way to get the most accurate figure and then tell the department, you get to expend that amount? And if you want more to do exactly what you want, well, maybe you just can't do exactly what you want. You get what's budgeted. Can we ever look forward to a day where that's how we operate? We
actually are very close this year. And again, at the time, there was the $70 million that was given to us right after the fiscal year started this year. But that did not take into consideration the reimbursable and the FLSA needs, which brought us to that $85 million, which is where we're at today. So to answer your question, I do believe we can be held accountable. if given the realistic amount, and that is where the CAO, and we've been working on that for next year's budget. So, yes, because we've been held accountable for our budget for the last 5 years, and overtime is one that we would like to be held accountable as well if funded properly.
Very good.
One of the, sorry, Mr. Bloomfield, but one of the areas on overtime that actually seems pretty fixable with some cooperation from other agencies is the scheduling of testimony. And I was wondering if we've made any progress in dealing with the district attorney's office or the courts in trying to reduce the need for calling people in for testimony.
The district attorney's office is willing to work with us, and it was a little bit slower in coming, I think, on the district attorney's side. We were working on the city attorney's side, which is a little bit easier, and that's a huge volume. But we do believe that we're making some progress. Laura, you may have some additional insights on it. But we do feel that that's it is the tougher ones because the courts are so stretched themselves that we do have to make ourselves available, but we do think we can make progress, and we've got a great relationship with both the city attorney's office and the district attorney's office on that.
Yeah. Overall, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but overall, our court overtime has gone down over the years because there have been a number of strategies that have been implemented. And, you know, it's a work in progress. But, yeah.
Great. Let me go to Mr. Blumenfield, if I could, please. He's been waiting patiently. Mr. Blumenfield.
It's all good. We're talking about the overtime issue. Is part of the issue also the reimbursement? Are we getting full reimbursement from organizers of events?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
And we're tracking it because got the sense that we weren't. You know, part of it is we expected to get an economic benefit from some of these events, and that we were allowing for a less than full cost reimbursement. But are we getting full cost reimbursement on all events at this point?
Well, oftentimes those are negotiated amounts. If it's not full cost reimbursement, then it's a negotiated amount that's somewhat lesser than the total amount. But in terms of what we have expected to be to bill for and what we've received, yes, we are getting full cost reimbursement for.
Like the Made in America, all those events we're getting, we either have gotten or fully expect to get 100% of the negotiated reimbursement rate?
Yes.
And the Office of Operations has been really working hard, especially in the last 18 months, to have a very realistic number that we are working with when we go into negotiations. And that seems to help because historically we've struggled on occasion. We've been doing a much better job in the last 2 years in that regard.
When you say, what are you referring to, like the percentage of actual costs?
The actual number that we believe it's realistic, what we expect to work overtime, barring anything really catastrophic. And I think Made in America was a good example of where we were really, really right on the point. I mean, we were very, very close on that one. And I think that really is because of the Office of Operations looking at the historic numbers and having Laura and her shop work with them as they go into the negotiations. Rather than us being an afterthought in the negotiations, we're actually part of the negotiations. I think that has helped.
And like on that one, did we get 100% of our costs back?
Of the overtime costs.
Ultimately, I'm not sure what was actually negotiated, but we got the amount back that was negotiated that we would receive, that we would get back.
As you know, when we have any type of event in the city, there are normal costs that we as the department would absorb or the city would absorb anyway. So that is where we're trying to really break off, because I believe Made in America was about 550,000, and that is above and beyond what our normal deployment would be. That was what we really worked toward.
Yes.
And then, so that's great. And who does that actual negotiation at the end to say that we're going to get 80% or?
In that particular case, it was the mayor's office was working with the organizers. It depends on what the event is.
And does the council office sign off on that, or that's done solely through the?
I'm not sure.
I believe council signed off on the Made in America, but that would be a question for the mayor's office. But I believe the council did sign off on it.
Thank you. That's good information. The other piece of this, and I don't know how we address this, but looking at the totality of today's agenda, there's a lot of closed session items on costs that are related to the department, but don't show up in the departments. And I'm talking about liabilities. And that's the one area I don't know how we go about it, but either aligning the costs better or getting a better handle on that. And I know that you're working on that. Maybe just give us a sense of what we can expect in terms of trying to bring those liabilities down.
Yes, we have a risk manager in the department now, and we have, as you all know, our special assistants to constitutional policing. Both of them are attorneys themselves, and they have forged a really good relationship with the city attorney's office. There is a strategic plan that was heard at Police Commission that lays out how to start bringing down liability, not just for lawsuits, but also for workers' compensation, and a variety of different areas hitting some of the key pillars of liability for the department, including traffic accidents and pursuits and use of force. They have a full strategic plan, and I'm sure they would be very happy to come and share the highlights of that plan with Budget and Finance or with the council, whatever. Once budget's over, I'm sure you are so deep in that right now, but they have a very good plan that they have laid out, and the Police Commission has approved, and the Police Commission will be holding the department accountable as we move forward.
Great. We look forward to that, and I know we're all eager on that, so thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Englander.
Yeah, this will be, I guess, one of your last times before this committee. So thank you for, first and foremost, your incredible dedicated years of service to the city of Los Angeles. And I've just personally enjoyed really working with you. You've made such a huge change in everything you've done, such a positive change. And I want to thank you for that. As it relates to this overtime issue, I know some of the overtime things that can be controlled are not controlled because we don't have the means or technology to do so. And examples of that could be at an organized event, be it for over a day or a 3-day event, a spontaneous event where we've got to set up a command post for a major incident. You've got a CP in the perimeter, whether it's a fire or any other type of major event or disaster. And the command post doesn't necessarily know which officers may be working a perimeter can clock in and clock out, or who's at the end of watch versus who's coming on a new shift. And managing that time, we don't have the technology. I've been pushing and urging us to do something about that because there's a huge amount of time and overtime cost that could be managed, but we just don't have the technology to do so. I mean, literally, if most people don't know, when you show up and check in at a command post or at a perimeter, they write your name down on a piece of paper that you're there, and then they'll figure it out later because there's no way to figure out, okay, that officer started at watch 3, they're almost done, you can relieve them, tell them to go home and to watch, bring in the next officer or whatever. And somebody can actually just look on a sheet and say, okay, we've got 4 officers that are end of watch, a new shift is starting, call the divisions and see who's free to come up based on other incidents and call volume. I mean, there's a whole different management we can do. And then not to mention recapturing and ensuring we're capturing, and it was brought up by my colleagues, mutual aid. So those reimbursables, we know exactly who was there at what rank, at what cost, and for reimbursements and things like that. What can we do?
Well, there's a couple of there's a project, a technology project right now that Ms. Goodrich is looking into.
I'm well aware. This was a softball question.
Yeah,
yes,
and that has, as you know, for the last couple of years, that's been a huge priority for us. And the issue is always about the funding on technology, but we do believe that will reap benefits in terms of actually cutting costs in terms of the overtime component. On the second side of that, when you're talking about the ability for us to identify rank and who's there and collecting that, Laura in her shop is now a critical component of all of our command posts for the pre-planning. And she was, for example, when we had the Dorner command post, she was up and running so that we can get real-time numbers in a much quicker manner. But what we're finding, as you know, and I know that's what you're leading towards, is that technology will be absolutely critical for us in terms of being able to account for outside agencies coming in on the mutual aid side of the shop, as well as the internal, who's there for the amount of time that they're there at the command, or that they're there for the incident versus what they're doing every day in the field, because that, as you know, took us months to undo in several of our historic large events.
We're paying overtime to figure out the overtime.
Or it's people like me who don't get overtime who are sitting there trying to figure out the overtime. But you are absolutely right that that is an area that we can really benefit from as we move forward with technology. And I don't know, Laura, if you have any further that you have on the project.
No, and as I think we've mentioned before, that's going to be something that's going to show up in our budget request for next fiscal year.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I know the pilot's coming out soon. I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
So, and the whole idea is you take your LAPD ID card, swipe it, RFID tags, and it
It'll
just
be
locks
huge.
you in the system.
Yeah.
It's all tied to payroll. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Those will really be dollars saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, substantial. Those are real dollars.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions for the police department? Are you sure? I really hate to let Chief MacArthur go. I mean, just to echo Mr. Englander, it has been really a delight working with you. You've brought such a breath of fresh air to our discussions with the department. You've always been incredibly forthright and in dealing with us. You've brought dramatic changes to the handling of the personnel in the Los Angeles Police Department and training and in every other area. And you've made a lasting difference that the city will benefit from a very long time.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us then to the fire department. Let's bring up fire next.
It's the first time I was ever during the episode.
We'll give Miguel a round next time.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Why don't we start with our public safety chair, Mr. Englander.
Hello, thank you so much for everything you do as well. And I had a question on the drill towers. It's funded in there to put up a second drill tower, and a couple of things is related to that. First and foremost, I don't think we can hire fast enough. We haven't been, and we were off to a bad start in the hiring as well, and without reliving all of that, and a lot of it's being resolved. Is the second tower because of the delays, or is it there was discussion last year in the budget process to put a second tower in Pedro, and the Budget and Finance Committee axed it. So it was off the table, and it was not funded. And it keeps popping its head up again and again and again in different reports, in my committee, in this committee. And I don't know if that was just because somebody's really pushing to have another tower down there, or is it to catch up to what we've lost this year? Because it shows up in different reports, and that's $2.5 million. I would much rather use that $2.5 million to hire that many more firefighters, quite frankly. But I don't know if in doing so, if that sets us further behind or not.
And just to save time, because that was my only question as well for the fire department, so let me just dovetail onto that too. The Budget and Finance Committee was explicit in the last budget. I thought we were in saying that we preferred to have more classes in the Valley Drill Tower and not fund the opening of the Harbor Drill Tower. I thought we were explicit in that for cost efficiency reasons. That being said, I also agree with Mr. Englander that we just can't hire fast enough. And so I don't know that the drill towers are the pinch point, though, in hiring. We're still having challenges getting people through personnel and everything else. Why is it that we're ready to open that second drill tower on April 1st when we hadn't budgeted for that?
And before you jump into the answer, just to add on to that, and one of the big concerns that came out of the discussions during the last budget deliberations were that if we have a second drill tower running at the same time or an overlap, those are 15 firefighters, personnel at a minimum, that are then taken off the streets and put in to run the other tower. And then on top of that, instead of running them at the same location or increasing the number of participants, because of constant staffing and other shortfalls that we have, we're going to have to make that up too. So, and that's not part of the $2.5 million. So if you can address all those issues.
Bless you.
I'll start from the budgetary aspect. In reviewing the documentation from the mayor's proposed budget as well as the instruction from the Budget and Finance Committee, the instruction that the fire department received was that there would be a total of 3 classes. There were 2 that were budgeted in the mayor's budget, and then there was the third one that was budgeted, that was wherein the funding was placed in the UB. You are absolutely correct, council members, that we can't hire fast enough. And, if I can make an observation, I think, part of the problem in terms of our inability to hire quickly enough is because of the use of the stratified random sampling methodology that was used by the personnel department. That concept, I think, was understandable to the extent that the personnel department did lack staffing in order to accommodate a large candidate pool or a large applicant pool in processing, similar to the problems that they encountered last fiscal year. And so the concept of the stratified random sampling is that they would use random sampling to identify the same percentage of candidates that applied in order to reduce the applicant pool to a meaningful or more manageable size that they could process expeditiously. The end result of that is that, for example, in the first written test schedule, they only scheduled 300 candidates for testing, and approximately 200, a little bit over 200, I think, showed up for the written test. With each test part, there are candidates who end up dropping out. The end result was that even though we were anticipating that 60 recruits would be hired within the first class, which started December 29th, we only ended up with 43. So because of the small applicant pool that ended up being tested, the second class was originally scheduled for sometime in March. We ended up having to delay that class to April the 6th because we didn't have enough applicants for a meaningful class size at even Drill Tower 40. As a result of delaying the March class to now April the 6th, we are now anticipating that there are going to be 48 applicants that will be able to enter the Drill Tower 40. The next class, was scheduled for June 1st, and we're really not optimistic that a class of 60 is even a viable number. If we get 50 within the third class, I think, we'll be lucky. And I did hear, from Councilmember Krikorian's deputy that, he was under the impression that Drill Tower 40 was not designated to be scheduled because of the concerns of having to reassign 20 instructors, but the fire department
20,
felt...
so we're actually talking about 40, not the 15. I'd said 15, it's 20.
Yes, there are 20 that end up being assigned to Drill Tower 40 in order to ensure that there is an appropriate ratio of instructors to recruits, so that we can ensure their success. So yeah, we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. We're not even going to be able to hire the 165 that we had originally anticipated.
If I can suggest that maybe working with the CLA and the CAO and trying to model out what would work best in the time frame, and try to figure out the path to hire as many as possible for the most cost-effective manner, with taking fewer firefighters off the street as well. I think that would be my suggestion, if there's a way to report back on and quickly to look at modeling and working out an analysis of time and space between, rather than having just, okay, it would be easier to get up another drill tower, and I hear you, and it's critical. But there may be a hybrid. There may be another way to do it. But I think you got to sit down and actually crunch the numbers and look at the hours and look at how many actual recruits we can have and what that space would be between working that and personnel. Because quite frankly, I think every single dollar that we're going to throw towards this has to be in either a new hire, ambulance augmentation, and or equipment for our firefighters. So that would be my suggestion.
Chief, sir, Honorable Board, Chief Rideout. I'm from the Bureau of Training and Support. Just to answer a couple of your questions. As far as the process, the actual testing process, we've been looking at continuous improvement all along. myself, along with my staff, we have been working with them to improve the process, and we are looking at making several changes coming up here in the new calendar year, as well as having a recruitment campaign. As far as opening up the drill tower, we have looked at several. We have not taken the 20 out of the training academy. We've only taken a skeleton crew just to be able to get the training academy up to speed as far as training the recruits. And the reason to have two academies going at once is not only it's a two-part. It's not only to get as many firefighters as we can, as quickly as we can, but we also, not everyone learns at the same amount of time. So it allows those from one class to drop into another class if they meet a certain criteria, and which saves us money, in salaries and overtime in the field, because those people end up graduating, and we've had a 100% success rate in allowing those folks to actually do that. Sir? Okay.
No.
As far as bringing the staff in, we have brought in several captains. We like to stay within our ratios. Right now, we do have 48 that are actually signed up to go into Drill Tower 40. I'm anticipating getting a few more. We've been working truly diligently with the personnel department, and we're looking at kick off a recruitment campaign hopefully later on this year in July to basically open the testing potentially back up in the beginning of the calendar year with a newer.
What it would cost to, that wasn't part of the FSR that stood out to me on then fulfilling those 40 bodies that are currently in the field that would be in both drill towers, and that cost as well associated with that gap. Is that part of the request today as well, or would that be coming when we initiate the drill towers?
I'm sorry, Councilman, could you ask that question again?
So the 40 that we're taking, the training personnel out of the field to go train, they would have to be offset with either overtime. Well, really only overtime. There's no other way to do it. We don't have any other bodies to pull from. We're already thin. Are those already budgeted? Have we already calculated the cost in overtime as well for those 40 during that whole period of time?
Are you indicating is that above and beyond the constant staffing overtime deficit that we're acknowledging in the report?
Would that be over?
That's already factored in as part of the deficit.
Part of the equation.
Yes.
Well, just to follow on that line, on page 28 of the FSR, it indicates that approximately 20 sworn members will be assigned to Drill Tower 40, which will result in field vacancies. Therefore, it is recommended that $2.3 million of the funding for the UB firefighter hiring line item be transferred to the department's constant staffing account. So that $2.3 million pays for the overtime necessary to staff that one drill tower, right? So that's an action that we're approving today.
Yes, the UB funding was for $3 million to provide for the third class. My response was with regard to Mr. Englander's question with regard to the 40 in Drill Tower 81. So the $3 million is for the additional staffing that's required for Drill Tower 40.
Okay. And Chief, this also indicates that opening the Drill Tower 40 required major infrastructure improvements, which have been primarily funded from the Special Training VET Fund. What's usually funded from that?
That's our vocational education training fund, and it has everything to do with training. We fund everything from in-service training projects to recruit training projects also. So we've used that fund to be able to assist us in upgrading the facility.
Okay, but when the department's budget for this fiscal year was prepared, it didn't include the money necessary to open Drill Tower 40. It explicitly did not include that. So what was budgeted to be spent from the special training fund, which will now not be done because those funds have been transferred out?
If I can clarify, Councilman, we do develop a budget for the special training fund at the beginning of the fiscal year in anticipation of the fact that we would be opening up Drill Tower 40. And frankly, we recognize the need to upgrade Drill Tower 40 2 fiscal years ago because it has not been used in 5 years. So that was included as one of the anticipated expenditures with the training fund. So there were not items that suffered as a result of our using the vet funds for that purpose.
Okay, I don't want to belabor this too much because I think we're all seeking the same goal, which is expediting the hiring of firefighters as quickly as we can. But almost a year ago, we said that opening up Drill Tower, the Drill Tower 40 would cost another $4.2 million, which was not being budgeted in the budget that we approved. And we made the decision that, in fact, in the memo from Chief Featherstone to Mr. Santana in May, it says a 4th recruit class by adding Frank Hodgkins as a drill tower would require 22 new instructors and require additional funding of approximately $4.2 million. So it was my understanding that we had made the decision that we would not budget for the opening of Drill Tower 40 for all the reasons that Mr. Englander said about displacement, but also because of the startup cost issue. Am I not correct about that? Because if that is what we intended to do, then budgeting it through the special training fund in order to fund it, we're not having a meeting of the minds on how to budget for that. So that's my concern.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Sorry. The department never anticipated using general fund monies to start up Drill Tower 40. I think, and I'm not familiar, with the particular document that you're reading from, but my recollection was that during the Budget and Finance Committee discussions about the possibility of maximizing the greatest number of classes, that Frank Hodgkins was kind of a third facility. Frank Hodgkins has not been used as a training facility for quite some time. My recollection was that internally the department was planning on using vet funds in order to upgrade the infrastructure in Drill Tower 40. So, I guess in my mind there was no confusion on the department's part. It was always the department's intention to use vet funds for that purpose, and it had actually been appropriated internally for that purpose. So, I guess in our mind, what the department has done, is not in conflict, with the discussion in Budget and Finance Committee, and, maybe it's just our confusion. And now that you mentioned Frank Hodgkins as part of the document, that may be contributing to where the disconnect is in our conversation right now.
Could be.
But Frank Hodgkin, was never as part of the equation. I think that
And
Frank
is
Hodgkin may have been...
is not now.
Okay.
Correct? And is not now.
No. We have never anticipated using Frank Hodgkins because it just is not a facility that reasonably can be used. I think it may have been discussed possibly as within the context of a platoon duty schedule that I think, Councilmember Bonin may have raised. And the department also evaluated the feasibility of a platoon duty schedule. And the difference between the platoon duty schedule that had been implemented many years ago and now is because of FLSA. Recruits are not eligible for the 7K exemption, and as a result, we would have to be essentially paying recruits to be sleeping. So we have to pay them straight time of 40, and if they're on platoon duty, we would have to pay them time and a half for the 16 hours of platoon duty. That would also apply to the instructors because they are also not eligible for the 7K exemption.
Okay. Anything further on this, members? Mr. Kratz.
Yeah, so with the numbers we have, did we break even in terms of the number of firefighters that leave the department and the number that replace them this year? Are we anticipating breaking even?
No, we are still way behind.
So how many firefighters do we expect to train this year, and how many will we lose through attrition?
If we are able to graduate 130, I think we'll be incredibly lucky. We're anticipating at the end of the year that we'll probably have a vacancy factor of about 250.
So that's just for the year, or this is overall in the department? So I'm just saying year to year, so we bring in 130, are you saying we're going to lose 230 over and above that? Or that's just how far we're behind for the whole department?
Well, probably that ends up to be a net vacancy factor of about 230 by the end of the fiscal year. So that's why, from the standpoint of the fire chief, he believes that it's so critical to have as many classes as we reasonably can.
Are we looking at other ways to hire people? Or are we looking at firefighters from other departments that have expressed interest in coming over? Are we looking at bringing retirees back on a 90-day contract to do some of the training? I guess, are we looking at people that have sustained injuries and can't actually go out in the field and moving them to doing some of the training? Are we doing anything out of the box of that type to add to the department?
I know that there has been some internal discussions about the possibility of hiring firefighters from other agencies. I think that the fire chief needs to delve into that option a little bit more. We have also discussed with the pensions department the feasibility of being able to bring back those who have recently retired. There are some concerns about rehiring those who have retired because of the fact that, we have to ensure that they maintain their physical fitness, they're able to maintain their EMT, and, but that is an option that the fire chief has been discussing and looking into.
Have we looked at having some of those folks do training as well? Because even if they were a little behind in terms of their fitness, they would probably still be fine as trainers.
We have not typically used folks that have been injured out in the drill yard for several different reasons, because a lot of the instructors have to basically demonstrate a lot of the activities that they have to actually do, so it goes beyond their limitations. So normally we have not used them. And as far as the, as far as hiring additional firefighters, I recently had a discussion with the fire chief, and there have been several firefighters that have been laid off throughout the state. So in our new process, we're looking at trying to get several of those folks in our process also.
Is there any way to expedite some of the processing of our applicants? Because I don't know if we've done it. I know we've talked about it for several years of having a more automated system in personnel, for instance, that when people apply, there are certain automated questions that can be asked, and the wrong answers will automatically screen them out. So we could reduce huge numbers down to something more manageable if we were using those systems. Are we doing any of that? Are we looking at any of that?
The personnel department already has a system very similar to what you are talking about now, wherein there's certain questions that are asked, and they will automatically get screened out at that point. So they're actually already using an automated system.
So obviously, at one point, I think we had a backlog of 17,000 applicants. Presumably, we hadn't used those systems on that backlog.
That is correct. And there's also what they call a personal history form that they fill out, that a lot of our LAFD captains actually assist in that screening process with personnel to further streamline the selection process. So
we do now have some of those processes in place.
Yes, there's several layers as they go through the process, and some of the newer things that we've done is to actually add our fire department captains, not only in the interview process, but in the pre-investigative background interview.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Bowden, anything?
No, I appreciate you saying you think we'll be down 230 or 250 at the end of the year. I keep hearing it's going to be closer to 300 from folks in the department. But the thing I think should also be pointed out is we're going to lose a heck of a lot of sworn over the next year who are going to sort of phase out of the drop program, right? Like 170 or so.
That's correct.
Yeah, next fiscal year, we're anticipating about 175 that are going to be dropping.
The department continues to shrink. Yeah. Thanks.
That's why we're looking at the continuous hiring process, along with the continuous classes, getting as many through as we can. We've truly updated our training academy over time. A lot of sweat and tears, and we've actually got our attrition rate down to approximately 15 to 20%. When in some of the previous years it was up as high as 30%. So we're very, very happy as far as our training academy. It's very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, just trying to, like my colleagues, get my head around the number, the net vacancy rate number. Is that, how does that compare to last year's net vacancy rate in the previous year?
Because of the fact that we haven't hired in 5 years, that's why the vacancy factor is as high as it is. So the previous fiscal year, we only had one class, right? So that's why the whole issue of catch-up, is so tremendous. I think there are approximately between 75 and 100 that are exiting through drop, the current fiscal year. And as I indicated, for next fiscal year, that's going to exceed 175. So
and that'll be on top of so our net vacancy would go up
yes,
by the 230 plus the 175.
right.
And so the previous year, was it also at 230 or was
I'm sorry, Councilman, I don't have the numbers in front of me. But given the fact we haven't hired in 5 years, and only had one class last year, the vacancy factor was incredibly high to the point where the sworn members love overtime. It's reached critical mass. They now have too many overtime opportunities, which we have difficulty filling.
And the reason we're asking these is because we're all on your side in terms of trying to get more folks into these positions as fast as we can.
We want to hire as many as we can also. We definitely see the need out there. It's not only just a fiscal issue, but if you actually go out and you talk to the firefighters, it becomes a safety issue also because, folks get tired over time working so much. So we're trying to hire as many as we can, at the lowest attrition rate as we can.
So,
Mr. Englander.
based on the discussion, I'd like to make a motion, because I think this is time-sensitive and critical, is ask the fire department to come back with a report back with working with personnel department, the CLA and the CAO, to develop an immediate, short-term, and then long-term, and I would call long-term a next 3-year hiring plan. That's not very long-term, but for us, we're day by day right now with this department, and trying to just keep it operational on a shoestring budget. And it's one of the most important things we do, quite frankly, in the city of LA. And so we want to make sure that we do it correctly and consistently. The start and stop isn't efficient, and while we've lost time, and it makes sense to quickly assemble either a second or third or fourth drill type, just get as many in as soon as possible of the right candidates makes a lot of sense. But then over the course of the next 2 or 3 years may not be sustainable either, may not be in our best interest. And economically, financially, where we're looking at this is, I just want to repeat it because I opened with it. I'd like to see every single dollar we can squeeze put into hiring a new firefighter. And I think that plan needs to be established immediately in writing, and how we get there, and that roadmap. And so I'd like to see that come back before we move on this piece of it, continue along the process. That would be my suggestion, and continue along the process that you're doing, continue hiring, continue starting the drill tower, doing all the things we're doing, but hold off on the second one until we can get that done. I would believe we can do that in the matter of a couple weeks if we can sit down with those folks. And those are the experts in putting together the CLA, the CAO, and working with the personnel department to figure out and laying out a plan and a scope and what we would talk about in terms of feasibility to do that. And with that plan then, hopefully we can come back and say, okay, we now have an aggressive hiring plan laid out and the cost attributed with that. We know what's coming, and we're not micromanaging this for the next 3 years or 4 years in financial status reports and updates and changes, and we can have something smooth, as we do with LAPD. And it's a little easier with them because they're consistent and constant and regular in terms of hiring and how many classes. And I'd like to see the same thing, quite frankly, happen with the fire department. I think we need to get there. We need to do it quickly. So that would be, the first part of that would be, that's my motion, if you will.
Mr. Herman, I'm going to give you one warning. This is it. If I hear your voice and you distract me from the business of this meeting, you're going to leave. If you wave your arms around and you distract me from the business of the meeting, you're going to leave. This is not a city council meeting where you can get away with that. You will be asked to leave. I've given you your one and only warning. I don't want to hear your voice again.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to second that. It's incredibly distracting when we're trying to have a conversation and a dialogue with our scheduled, agendized experts and folks that are on those departments. And the waving of the, walking around and waving hands and making all these gestures is incredibly distracting. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Thank you.
If, just for the clarity of your videotape, if I determine that you are distracting us from the work of this meeting, I will ask the sergeant to show you the door. That's your one and only warning. All right, so
I would ask that they come back with a written plan, working with the CLA and the CAO and the personnel department as soon as possible. And I would put that time frame out to the next 2 weeks and come back to us with that and look at what we do immediately, but a 3-year plan in terms of how many classes, what are the class sizes, how often, full operational plans, and it shouldn't be that complicated. So we can approve it, and we can look at it, and we know what we're getting into to know that we have a path, because right now it doesn't feel like we do. And I know you guys are frustrated as well, so I think it'll help for all of us.
and I'd certainly like to second that, but I just want to make sure that if we move forward with this and this report back, that in itself will not disrupt the current path that you're on in hiring, will it?
If I can gain some clarity on the motion, what we are anticipating, as I indicated, our next class is going to be scheduled for April the 6th, and in fact, 48 of the applicants, have already been offered jobs, and we anticipate that they're going to be entering the April 6th class. The next class is going to be the early part of June and, possibly, mid-June. We would ask that those two classes continue, and that what we would like to propose in reporting back to the committee is the anticipated class schedule for the next 3 years, which would result in our being...
Would that result in still starting up the second drill tower, which we've never approved, and in fact we've said specifically not to?
The next class, the April 6th class, is scheduled for drill tower 40.
So what I would suggest is to start with that class and get the report back to us before the next one and not approve the next one.
Fair enough.
Because we don't want to hold anything up, but we want to get some clarity on this.
Great. That'll be the action of the committee. The motion will be approved, I should say. I should have said this at the outset. The department has a built-in structural deficit that has been, going on over the years, in part because of the ambulance augmentation, in part because of inadequate number of bodies in light of constant staffing, that we wrestle with this every year. I do want to note that the department has made progress in bringing that down, and I want to really recognize that, because this is, you may have fewer ways to do that than any other department, and still you're making progress in doing it. So I really want to applaud you in helping to chip away at that structural deficit. So there's no other questions for the fire department? Members, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. No applauding either, Mr. Herman. All right, that will bring us then to finance.
Good afternoon, Office. Saul Romo with the Office of Finance. Answer any questions you may have, or if you'd like, I could recap what's in the FSR on our departmental issues.
Sorry, 1 second. Still too much noise. All right, go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Saul Romo with the Office of Finance. I could just entertain the questions you may have, Council Member, or if you'd like, I could just give a quick recap on what's in the FSR.
Not necessary. I think Mr. Kretz had a question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, have we ever done a top-to-bottom analysis of all of our commercial paper and which loans perhaps should be refinanced, et cetera, et cetera?
I think that question was best directed to the CAO, as they maintain all of the commercial paper transactions on behalf of the city.
Yes, and we do constant analysis of where we stand with commercial paper, our capacity, what, if any, opportunities we have to move commercial paper items into longer-term structures, because, as you know, commercial paper is more of a short-term tool that we use for purchasing of equipment and things of that nature. And then as we have enough capacity to move into a longer-term structure, that's when we do the analysis whether or not it makes sense to do so, or to just, occasionally we decide to buy stuff with cash instead, and which also limits, which allows for a greater capacity to use commercial paper for other purposes.
Or maybe I should ask more broadly. Have we done an analysis of all our loans and all our instruments to see whether there are loans we should be refinancing, large and small, or do we just kind of roll along most of the time?
I mean, it's a lot of the analysis is based on the market conditions at the time. So we look at everything we have outstanding to see what opportunities there are for refundings, to see what opportunities there are to move from, like I said, a shorter-term structure like commercial paper to something that's a little bit longer. It's a constant analysis that takes place, that we have to look at market conditions as well. The interest rates that we have with commercial paper versus interest rates that may be available with longer tools. But it's an ongoing review that we do.
So how often would you say you review a particular loan?
For commercial paper, we do it because the capacity is so great, because the need is so great with regard to purchasing of equipment, and the capacity that we have is not. We need to constantly be looking to see how we could free up commercial paper every year to allow for purchases of such things like technology equipment that may be requested. So what happens is we move items that may be with one tool, like commercial paper, to a longer tool to free up, in essence, space for new purchases with commercial paper. And then with other tools like MICLA, for example, we do the same thing. We see what we can refund so that we create more space for the next set of demands that we're going to get from departments.
So would there ever be a value in creating a report going through all of our loans and where they stand and what our analysis is of them, or is this so much of a moving target that it would be outdated by the time it would be produced.
I mean, we can provide you a status as to our current, what we have with different programs. I mean, the problem is that if you really want to be more specific on general fund, because we have, I mean, our portfolio extends beyond just general fund needs. It extends into wastewater, extends into sewer system, into a bunch of different enterprises. So if you like, we could put a couple initial reports together to see if that's kind of the information you want, kind of just on a trial basis. And if you want more information, we could go back and see what else we can add to that report. But I mean, it could be a very extensive report is what I'm trying to get to, if you wanted to see every item and where we stand with each one. But it's something that we could work on.
Yeah, if you could take a crack at that, I think that would be of interest.
Sure. I mean, I know we've come with reports on MICLA before, capacity issues with MICLA. So, I mean, we've done it on a more ad hoc basis, but if you want something more comprehensive, we could take a look at putting that together for you.
Right.
Sure.
Thank you. Anything else for finance members?
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and, since I see a few folks from DOT, why don't we go with Mr. Bonin and the Department of Transportation next?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I had several questions, actually, on the DOT FSR. My first question was about the parking fine revenues. It shows that they are going to be down $11 million this year, and it lists a number of reasons for that. One of them is full-time and part-time vacancies, and I note that it says that the full-time staffing levels have been brought back to approved levels, but the part-time levels are still lagging. Why is that?
It's become a hiring issue. We just had 4 this week resign to take full-time employment. As the economy's improved, the pool of available candidates to be part-time officers is dwindling. And keep in mind, when we take part-timers and make them full-time, that depletes the ranks. So when we went back to 572 in December, we lost the 23 out of the part-time ranks, and we're trying to replace those. We have a class starting next Monday, April 6th.
So, but we won't be able to fill these vacancies in order to sort of recoup our loss.
We're going to go down to one more adjustment in the percentile, down to 75%, and call in another group for interviews. That list is about to expire. We're also looking at putting this on the list for the CAO's consideration for continuous hiring, so we always have a pool rather than have a limited list.
I like that idea. Would we be better off, though, just moving away from part-timers altogether?
There is an equation out there to do that. There are 38 vacancies that are full-time vacancies that are being held to pay for the currently 104 part-timers, although we're authorized to 150. So there may be a ratio in there where maybe we don't go down to 75 and hire an extra 10 or something along those lines. We've had discussions with the CAO about that and the mayor's budget office.
Yeah, because if it's hard to fill the part-timers, harder to fill the part-timers than the full-timers, and we're relying on them to bring in revenue, and we're going to be down $11 million, that's a pretty significant hit.
That's correct. We do appreciate the fact that there is a part-time program, because we do get to screen the people that make sure they're suited for the work, because, it's sometimes a thankless job, and so as we get to see them, it's good to see them as part-timers before they advance.
Okay. Thank you. I had a question about a few of the different transfers. One of them, I note that there's a transfer of about $400,000 from local transportation fund Ciclavia account as reimbursement for traffic-related services for the October and December Ciclavia events. And the money is from a variety of different places. One is $300,000 from the Measure Our Local Return from the pedestrian plan account, and from the bicycle plan account. And those are as reimbursements for shortfalls for the upcoming events, the one we just had the other day. What are we going to be losing in the pedestrian plan and the bicycle plan accounts by not having that money?
Actually, Selwyn Hollins, Department of Transportation. In the budget, what the challenge we have is in the adopted operating budget versus monies that we have set aside to pay for these types of operations. The monies were set aside for this. They just are not in the right account throughout the year. So there's nothing that's lost. These were planned to do this type of work. We just need to put the money in the right account so that we can pay people.
You're saying when the budget was written, we had money in a pedestrian plan and in a bicycle plan that was really intended to help us
We do that.
reimburse costs?
That's pretty much how the budget goes every year. There are monies that are set aside in certain special funds, certain types of funds, with the intent of using it for these purposes throughout the year. The challenge we have is just ensuring that it's in, we move it as the needs arise. The monies are in, they may not be necessarily a line item that says for overtime, but it's for these types of projects, and it's a matter of putting it in the overtime account at this point.
So I'm not going to have the pedestrian or the bicycle coordinator coming back in a few months saying, yeah, this is something we're supposed to be doing, but you just gave away the money.
No, you will not.
All right, that's what I'm looking out for. Also had a question about transferring money from the traffic signal supply account. It says about $500,000 from the gas tax fund traffic signal supply account to fund some Prop C shortfalls related to street resurfacing. That's good. I want to make sure the DOT does its end of the street resurfacing bargain, doing the striping and all that. It's been a hot issue for us. But what are we taking that money away from? Are we now going to find out that we don't have enough money to pay for purchase of a new traffic signal?
Okay. When it comes to traffic signals, those are more planned projects. So we can get really creative in how we schedule those. Street resurfacing, as you all know, is more immediate. So as a department, we've said it's a priority to make sure we do our best to get the streets striped so we can keep moving forward. As far as the traffic signal projects, there are a couple of things that work here. Number one, as you know, we had the $6 million list. Okay?
Yes.
That list is secure. None of these funds are coming from that list to do the projects that didn't have funding. However, we do a lot of maintenance work with signals. We have, as you know, everyone's familiar with the 4,400 signals, but there's a lot of other assets that we have out there that we have to maintain. That's what the money is set aside for each year. As maintenance arises, things as simple as sometimes we have to replace out the signal boxes. Unfortunately, cars drive into boxes. Sometimes the loops deteriorate because the surface of the street starts to dissipate. So that's what the money is used for, to do a lot of the routine maintenance throughout the city. We have a very old infrastructure, a lot of miles to cover. The new signals, though, whenever we do a new signal, there is a study. Signals are planned. We don't take money out of this fund to just go build new signals. This fund, where we're taking the money from, is primarily for the maintenance and repairs of our signal operations.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. The money that we're transferring from could not be used for new signals?
It could be. Yeah.
Okay, because the $6 million that we're spending this year for those signals, it's not like that takes care of our entire demand. We could spend $18 million and we still wouldn't get done everything we need to get done, right?
Well, some of the signal projects are already grant funded. We do apply for grants.
Right.
The $6 million came from those that we didn't have funding for. We felt they were of high importance. Either they were involved in litigation, injuries, etc. So yes, projects arise all the time. We get a number of requests for new signal, new pedestrian buttons, equestrian, etc. What we do is try to plan those out based off of, is it something that is really urgent, or can it be, is it an immediate safety risk or not? And maintenance is, whatever we put out there, we have to maintain. So that's where most of this money is dedicated for, is maintenance.
All right. I'm asking just because a lot of these things seem like, oh, this is easy, okay, we can fix this here, but I'm always very wary of what we're not being told about what the money might not be used for later. And so that's why I'm sort of pursuing the line of questioning. I had one more, and it's a small one. It's only a $30,000 transfer from the Reserve for Future Transit Service to a third-party quality assurance program account. Is this just, what is this transfer about?
Excuse me, Ida Rubio with the Office of the CAO. So my understanding, this transfer is for a third-party consultant to do quality control work for the transit program. So they may have like mystery shoppers that go on buses to make sure that the drivers are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay. We're taking the money from a fund that's supposed to be for future transit service. I'm assuming that this fund for future transit service doesn't have particularly tight safeguards, because it doesn't sound like this is an actual future transit service.
There's a line item in the Prop A schedule that is used for unbudgeted things that the department may need, and there's about over $100 million in that line item that could be used. So this is one of those requests that came in after the budget was adopted, where they needed to.
So it's not that it's a future transit service. It's just that it's an account with loose safeguards.
A new activity that they want to pursue.
So it's an account with not particularly tight safeguards, is all.
Correct.
Okay. All right. It's $30,000. That I'm cool. I just wanted to understand. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gretz?
Yeah, you probably heard me speak on this before, but I have harped on this, and I'll continue to harp on it since it seems like we're now making it worse with the number of parking officers we have. When we first started to be in the red financially as a city, we cut employees in every area, including parking officers, despite the fact that having as many as we actually need is a win-win both for revenue, and your guy out there is driving me nuts again, Mr. Herman, continuing to distract and wave, etc. Where was I? Anyway, we stopped hiring officers and cut our numbers at a revenue loss and at a loss of ability to provide the safety reasons and other reasons that people get cited in the first place. So and of course we lose money. We have a net loss of money when we stop hiring officers. So we pushed, and we wound up getting part-time officers. Part-time for only one purpose, so they could avoid paying benefits, and it would be more cost-effective but not particularly fair to the people being employed. There is an accidental benefit. It does provide a little bit of an audition for some people to do the part-time job first, but that's an accidental positive benefit. It was never really contemplated when we made that switch. I think it's a fair point, though, that as the economy gets better, we're going to have a harder and harder time attracting people for what is essentially a bad version of a decent job as a traffic officer. And so I don't know that we can continue to anticipate being able to pull in enough part-timers to actually fill the department. And again, it's a lose-lose for us. We lose revenue, and we lose the ability to cite people parking in handicap zones and red zones and permit parking districts and in front of fire hydrants, as we should. So are we taking that into account? And again, will we have a budget that allows us to have the proper number of officers to write all the citations that we would want to be writing? Because there's certainly no financial savings in not hiring a full complement of people in this department.
You're correct. We had 42 vacancies that were held originally for funding. With the addition of the 5 that we got last year for full-time to assist in additional traffic control services, which we just hired, has got us back to the 5. Well, we're at 572 right now with retirements and things. We have a little bit of the same problem, but not as severe as the fire department with attrition. That could change in the near future. The program, you're correct. But again, I think that there might be a ratio. I think we could raise the one side and still keep a small number of part-timers, but increase the full-timers to accomplish the goals that you're talking about, and continue with the benefit, that unrealized benefit initially, but that we get to review these folks before we actually hire. There's now a process with a certain level of competency that they have to show in order to transition, and it does help us get better full-time traffic officers than just hiring cold from the street. So that's the only argument I have for keeping some part-timers, but certainly if we went back to full-strength officers at 8 hours a day, full-time, I would assume that the number would go up, the citation number.
So are we planning to do that? And are we planning on asking for that in this year's coming budget?
Not in this coming budget. We have had discussions with the mayor's office. The mayor's office has made a statement, the mayor's budget side, I should say, has indicated that they would like to keep some level of a part-time program, but they're willing to look at the ratio. And that was a discussion with their union that I was attending. So there is a willingness to look at it, but at this point they weren't willing to walk away from it.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily even suggesting that you get rid of all the part-timers. I'm suggesting that we get the full-timers up to a reasonable enough level that we're actually doing the job, and we're not losing the revenue that we've been talking about losing.
I concur.
Thank you. Members, anything else for DOT? I suppose tangentially related to this, because Mr. Bonin asked a question about the ciclovia. I do want to just applaud the department on an extraordinary job yesterday. It was an amazing, amazing success to move that many people through the streets of the San Fernando Valley without a single significant incident. I just wanted to thank you and congratulate you on a great success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, that brings up planning. Mr. Bonin, you want to wait? Okay.
Hello, Jan Zatorsky, Deputy Director of Planning.
Hello, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Thanks for sticking around.
Sure.
Just really had one question for you. I noticed that it says here that the department is going to have significant year-end salary savings in the amount of $14.2 million. And I did not want to commend you for that because it's due to a 26% vacancy rate in the department. And it sounds as if it's not that you guys want to have a 26% vacancy rate. It's that you're having trouble filling the vacancies. And I'd rather you not have a 26% vacancy, and even if we didn't have the extra $4 million at the end of the year. What is the problem?
Well, the bulk of that $4.2 million is special funded, so anything we don't spend will go back into the special fund. However, we have had an aggressive hiring plan since the beginning of the fiscal year. We went immediately to managed hiring in August and received approval for 81% of our positions. In addition, we hired 4 staff off our expiring planning assistant list and then worked closely with the personnel department to establish a new list. The list bulletin came out in October. We spent 3.5 weeks in December interviewing, and the list came out in January, and we're actually interviewing all week for over 100 candidates to fill 20 positions currently in planning. We found out a few weeks ago we actually have 40 vacancies in the planning assistant, and that's our entry-level class where we really need to add capacity. We've done other hiring, but I really need to we need to fill at the bottom levels to spend down that money because of constant attrition in other classes. But we are in the process right now of interviewing to hire 20 positions, and I have a request into managed hiring for the other 20, which I'm hearing is going to be at managed hiring on this Friday.
If those 20 that you're in the process of are filled, what does that bring your vacancy rate down to?
20, we have 80 vacancies, so it's around maybe 16, 17. I'm still high.
Yeah, that's still high. I mean, the department has been just absolutely gutted. I mean, I have sympathy for you and everybody else there. Just a routine, non-controversial case in my district now, 9 months for a hearing.
Right.
It's nuts.
Well, I did hear the fire department's issue about personnel. I mean, we support getting more resources to the personnel department. We've worked very closely with them, but I don't have an associate zoning administrator list right now. I don't have a senior city planning list right now, and my city planner list expired in October. So I'm in line with other departments to get these exams. We've done emergency appointments. I have 3 emergency city planners. I'm working on getting an emergency appointment zoning administrator right now. But the emergencies just kind of take from within. I really need to build that. We need to build that capacity and add new bodies at the bottom, at the entry level.
So I'm wondering what it is we as the council can do to help. Last year was my first year going through a budget cycle as an elected official. And at the end of the budget process, I felt pretty good about some of the decisions we made. And then the fiscal year's almost over and find out that in so many cases, a lot of the positions that we felt good about creating haven't been filled. What is it we can do so that the things we do in the budget cycle, we actually get done?
It's having active lists available to fill. I mean, we've hired 27 people this fiscal year and lost 24. So you have to keep up. People retire, people transfer out, people promote out. Exempting from the hiring freeze, which I hear is a potential possibility in this upcoming. If we can hit the ground running at the beginning of the fiscal year, that really helps us fill those positions right away.
What sort of attrition are you anticipating in the coming year? Do you have a lot of folks who are looking to retire?
We're averaging 2 to 3 a month. That's about what we have. Yes, there's more coming that I know of in the next few months.
Okay. Do you know about the next fiscal year?
No, but we get lists of eligible retirees. Generally, the city's workforce, I think, is an aging workforce that has a lot of employees eligible to retire kind of at any time.
Okay. Well, I, for one, would support an exemption from the hiring freeze for the department. It's, I think, at ridiculous levels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fritz.
Well, I think this situation is a real problem because I think for us to get out of our city recession, I think we partly have to economically develop our way out, and having a restricted planning force is a good way to prevent that from happening. I like the idea of exempting you from managed hiring, but to be honest, I like the idea better of exempting the entire city from managed hiring and actually passing a budget that covers what we can afford,
right,
rather than passing a budget that covers more than we can afford and leaving others other than the council to actually set the budgetary priorities at the end of the day. So I'm hoping that we can put more money into your department and help us get to where we need to go, and at the same time have that money be real and actually be implemented from the very beginning.
Yes, we've got a lot of money coming in, as you know, a lot of activity.
Anything else for planning members? All right, thank you very much. That brings us to the city attorney's office. Hi.
Hi, Steve. Jennifer Roth-Krieger from the City Attorney's Office.
I wanted to ask you about the liability claims account, which we have exhausted. I guess let's start with the general question. We're at mid-year now, and we've already exhausted our liability claims budgeted amount. What do we have to do to try to get a handle on our liability claims expenses, or to budget more accurately for it? We have to do one or the other. We have to either settle claims within our means, or we have to budget more accurately for it. So what are the steps that we need to take in order to get that done?
Councilman, to start, as you do know, this year in the liability claims account, there was $48 million in the account itself. An additional $6 million was placed in the UB as a line item for liability claims. We would certainly suggest that $6 million be placed into the liability claims account in the coming fiscal year, as it seems that every single year we're exhausting that line item. So to start, I think if that money showed up in the liability claims account, we'd start from a more accurate place. We did, in fact, project a $60 million, roughly $60 million would be spent in the current fiscal year for liability claims. It looks like we're roughly on track for that from the city attorney side of things. At the same time, as Tom Peters will tell you, I don't know if he's here or not, but from our office, he may be right outside waiting for the closed session items. There's no
Not
science.
raising his hand to volunteer if
No,
he
I
is.
don't
Okay,
blame
there he
him.
is.
I'm on the hot seat today. There's no science to projecting liability claims. It's all driven by the lawsuits that are filed against the city. Our lawyers, I know, are working hard to get the best settlements that they can, and of course, to the extent that we have judgments that come in against the city, that's something that's always a tough day for us. So we've got, I do want to point out that there are two parts to this account, though. There's I'll call it the general liability claims account, which the city attorney handles, and then there's the conflict panel, which the CAO handles. I think there's probably a little bit more projecting that could happen on the CAO side of things. For example, included in that $54 million that we were budgeted this year was $2 million for conflict cases. It turns out that the conflict cases are right now coming in at about $10 million. So part of what we're seeing in terms of a deficit, so to speak, is not related to the general fund side or the general liability side handled by the city attorney, rather handled by the conflict cases that are sort of merged into the same account, if that makes sense.
Okay. I know there's been some baby steps taken in the last year towards a serious risk management program, because the one thing that you said that I take a little issue with is that this is mostly out of our hands. It isn't. There's a lot more that we can do in claim prevention, in reduction of risk before it even gets to the liability claims fund. We don't need to belabor the point now, but I would like to see those efforts that we've begun working with the CAO and the city attorney, my office and others, to actually move that forward in a much more robust way, because every department in this city knows what its risks are going into every budget year. They know that they're going to get a certain number of employment claims. They know that they're going to get a certain number of casualties. They know that they're going to get a certain number of each of the types of claims. And I continue to be disappointed in our ability to get our hands around reducing that risk. And I think the city attorney is going to play a critical role in doing that, along with each of the departmental general managers.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I misspoke in that way. Risk management is certainly one of the city attorney's highest priorities. Your council was good enough to support a new information system, which has almost been fully implemented in our office, so that we can at least give you accurate information about claims that have occurred, and hopefully some more information about where the problem spots are in the city to help prevent future instances.
Mr. Englander, should we call that lit stat, maybe? Or what do you think?
Well, should we have taken the closed session items first today?
Maybe. But
Or do we have to
that
approve
could
this to
be
go
any
into
week.
closed session?
That could be any week, yeah. All right. So discussion to be continued, but I am concerned that the tank's empty and we still have a half a fiscal year to go, and there's a lot of potential, obviously, as there always is in any given month, for future liability. I would just stress also the need for all of your trial attorneys who are settling cases to keep the fiscal year in mind, given the fact that we have exhausted our budgeted amount. And to the extent that settlements can be had on July 1st instead of June 30th, that seems to me, from the perspective of the budget chair, to be a good practice, given the fact that we have a budgeted amount in the city to settle claims with. Some might argue it's kicking the can down the road. I think it's sticking to a budget. So I just want to make that point. Mr. Blumenfield, anything on this? Mr. Englander? Good. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. With that, members, there's one request that Building and Safety made, which is a written request, which I'm going to ask clerk to pass out now, and that I'll move to amend the FSR pursuant to the request from the Department of Building and Safety. And that request is to transfer $84,500 in order to replace one of two Time Warner cable lines to City Hall, which is no longer operable. The second line would prevent saturation and improve the performance of LADBS network, and also to transfer $380,000 to allow LADBS to establish an interface between its code enforcement information systems and the foreclosure registry program. And then the motion before you indicates the accounts from and to which those transfers would be made. If there's no objection to that, that motion will be approved and will be incorporated in the FSR. Now, before we act on the FSR, we do have two cards, Dr. Weissman and Mr. McQuiston. Dr. Weissman, welcome.
I'd certainly like to defer to Mr. McQuiston. He's my idol. He's the one who taught me how to do what I'm doing. So he's responsible if I'm not doing it right, too.
Well, Mr. McQuiston, why don't you come on up and join him? We'll take Dr. Weissman first, but come on and make your way up. Go ahead, Dr. Weissman.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As you know, I'm not a budget advocate, but I have a heavy hand in the document that you've already received. The document from the white paper from this year has 5 different areas. I'm going to focus on the issue today, but I want to say these 5 areas. The first one is a reconsideration of budget philosophy. The most drastic suggestion would be to move the fiscal year from July 1 to January 1. Not go into any detail right now because there's no time for it. But the second item on the paper is to improve our information technology. I know several of the members of this committee are very concerned about that. The infrastructure is the third. Our infrastructure, as of Times article a few days ago, just got bounced up by another $12 billion, if their statement is accurate, about how much money we need to fix our sewers. But we know from Mr. Englander's diligent work that we need about $5 billion for the streets and another $3 billion for the sidewalks. And when you list all the different kinds of infrastructure, there's 9 or 10 different categories. Those are very noticeable big ones. The next one, number 4, is personnel. And we noticed in many of the interviews we did with many departments how difficult it's been, and you've heard it from the people here, how difficult it has been to get people on the job because of personnel also being low in their staff over the years. And so that's a consideration that pervades all of these issues. The last is retaining and making permanent the Inspector General and to initiate and bring forward a true systematic citywide collection system. There is no doubt that we need that. If I can spend just a moment on the fire department. The fire department is, in my opinion, more important than the police department, because although the police department and the fire part of the fire department are important to protecting property, the fire department protects something that is far more important than property, that's lives and health.
Thank you.
So I would encourage full financing for the fire department, please.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. McQuiston?
Jim McQuiston. You know, lately, that $4 million judgment for the police versus $900,000 for the person who was actually killed. We're entering a new phase, you might say, of litigation. And I've been concentrating on the problem, looks really serious in the planning department right now. We have to stick with our plans. That's the state law. The other thing we have to do, and that is costing us dearly in personnel. The other thing that I'm very concerned about is the fact that the state law says that we shall tell the property owners to fix their sidewalks and their trees and their fire hydrants. And we did that for a number of years, and then we quit. and it doesn't make sense, and that is at least, according to my figures, $20 million that we can save by just following the state law. And nobody's going to be upset about it because that's what the state says we're all supposed to do, and we're not doing it. And so we're fostering a series of lawlessness, and that does affect me when the second largest city in the United States says that I'm bigger than the law and we don't have to obey the law. And that is something that we don't want to teach our children. So I am concerned about that. I have taken some steps against the people who have authorized these kinds of things, but I don't want to. We have a city. People are trying to do what's right. And if we tell them what's right, then we get good results. And if we don't tell them what's right, they have to figure it out themselves. That's when we get into trouble. And that goes for the police department, goes for the fire department. But I do want to say this in closing. If we put money in the special fund, no one can spend that money until it's actually put in that fund. So if you're concerned about towers or anything else, if you put those in a special fund and put zero money in the special fund, those will not be spent for that tower.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McQuiston. All right. Members, we've concluded our discussion of the FSR. If there's a motion to adopt the recommendations as amended. If there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee. All right. That brings us to our closed session items and item number 9. No, I'm sorry, items number 5 and 9. So item number 5 and 9 were both matters that I would have recommended as consent candidates, but for the cards. So, and I only have cards from Mr. Herman. So, Mr. Herman, you may speak for 2 minutes on both of those items. Collectively. Come on up now. Start the clock.
Item number 5 is the city attorney report relative to authority to enter into a contract with outside counsel, Iron Lewis Manley LLP, for the purpose of assisting city with litigation over the Bureau of Sanitation's biosolids program.
In regards to item number 9, Office of Finance report for the approval of a refund claim filed by KPMG LLP for $170,000 and some chump change of 438.69 cents. Physical impact statement, none was submitted. So in question to this refund claim, as many of you were listening in to the disbursement of this budget, we find that there are many errors in calculations to perceive that we are actually financially stable. As Mr. Paul Correz pointed out, we're still in a recession. So how can we back up and walk backwards saying that we're going to refund a claim that was filed and there's no date or time in this impact statement? It just shows you the incompetence, incoherentness of the budget master, you, Mr. Krikorian, not to include on this agenda the appropriations and their use for disbursement. So I find you at fault for the many of the city's errors in management, checks and balances, to secure that the city is healthy and safe, and you can concur with me that all the taxpayers' assets would be utilized appropriately and managed well so that we wouldn't have to suffer an economic breakdown, socioeconomic breakdown, as you may not have heard, but you're well aware of. Stop being closed-minded to the issue. Thank you.
All right. We've already approved, members, items 7, 8, and 10 on consent. I would ask that we also approve items 5 and 9. Seeing no objection, those matters are approved. That brings us then to our closed session items 1 through 4. And it's okay, the only cards that I have are Mr. Herman, so he can just stay right where he is.
Why get up twice?
Because he's next, so it's okay, thank you. But he has items 1 through 4,
Yeah.
and
Fucking harass.
you can have a minute on each of those, Mr. Herman.
No public comment, sir?
It is public comment.
Your time is running. Items 1 through 4.
No public comment, sir?
You're off topic now. Items 1 through 4, speak to those items.
Regarding the civil rights for the Cheryl Akil versus the city, it is very obvious that the advice of the pending litigation of liability finds at the fault of the city of Los Angeles. Just pay what you owe to these people. Not just in item 1, item 2, Sandra Thomas Moses, the city of Los Angeles. Both of these incidents involve LAPD excessive force, likely. Brutality, like Mr. Paul Koretz when he injured my arm that one time on October 7th, 2014. Assault and battery to a civilian at the council meeting.
Nothing to do with the topics that...
And then again, it has to do with lawsuits, sir.
And you're not going to have a dialogue with me or else you're going to be found out.
It has to do with lawsuits. The committee may recess to closed session to Government Code Section 54956 to confer with its legal counsel relative to the idiots who made the mistakes of injuring protesters during the civil rights following the Occupy LA protests. So I am not off topic, sir. I am on the subject of item 1, and if I detour my conversation to irrelevancy,
then you'll be shown the door.
Then let me go back to the product of what I'm discussing here, because it's the core issue of what I'm trying to settle in your mind on behalf of the public's interest when you interrupt a speaker on just 3 minutes, allow 1 minute of speaking time. That's effed up. Now let me finish. And so going on to the committee may recess to closed session, and this is item 2, Mr. Scrooge, to the Government Code Section 54956.9D, parentheses 1, to confer with its legal counsel relative to the United States District Court case number CV 13-05565 CAS, economic uncertainty? Pay for your mistakes. If there was adequate training for LAPD, no one's rights would have been violated under the civil rights of what the protesters and what this matter arises from the incident involving Miss Sandra Thomas Moses. Members of Los Angeles Police Department that occurred on July 21st, 2012 in Los Angeles, California. This is the reason why we are becoming the most bankrupt city in Los Angeles. And don't get me wrong, we're headed in that direction because of the lawsuits. We're paying $300 to $600 for outside counsel because we have litigators in the city attorney's office who can't smash a hamburger and close these liabilities and pay them out within a timely manner. Because, as the courts point out, we find you guilty and liable for the offenses you bring to the civilians of the city of Los Angeles. And then point number 3, another closed session. United States District Court case number CV 13-04524 DTP JCX, parentheses. The matter arises from an incident involving members of the City of Los Angeles Police Department on August 12, 2011. The same way you guys allowed the killing of a mentally challenged person in Los Angeles named Africa. Dumbass.
Thank you. That closes public comment on the closed session items 1 through 4. We will now retire into closed session, and general public comment will be taken at the conclusion of closed session. So if you're not here on the closed session items 1 through 4, please leave. We are back in open session, and the only matter remaining before us is general public comment. I'll take Dr. Weissman, please, followed by Mr. Herman.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
It's somewhat in follow-up to the budget, to the FSR that was discussed, but as I think you know, because I think all of you have copies of the white paper, and there are 5 items on that white paper I'm going to be discussing. The third of them, they go, first of all, from budget philosophy, which we've had some discussion of today and hope to have more of in the near future. The second one is communications and information management. That, to me, and I think the argument is good, is a form of infrastructure, too. The Information Technology Association is working, or group, ITA, is working very diligently in all kinds of directions, but they don't have a coordinated program. And one of the recommendations of this year's white paper is that a coordinated program be created. The area I'd like to focus on is the third of the areas, and it'll include actually the fourth one, because that is on the subject matter of infrastructure. Sorry that Mr. Englander isn't here, but he's certainly one of the most potent advocates for good improvement of our streets and our sidewalks as infrastructure. And it's apparent that from a bill that Richard Roberts, I'm blocking on his first name, and Sosato, who's the current GM of Boss, started way back in 2004, and wanted about $285 million, but that's ballooned now into $3 billion, and it's unnecessary. The deferred management of our infrastructure, I think, is quite intolerable, and the areas of infrastructure that need to be addressed are really multiple. Certainly streets, sidewalks, sewers, ITA, and the list is over 10. And one of the things we've been asking is that the CAO give us a full assessment of the value of our infrastructure. Some of that infrastructure has been mentioned as the property, both city-owned and private property that's owned. We would look forward to seeing what that really is so we know how to guide what we're going to do. I'm sorry for going on. I like to make compound, complex sentences, I think you know. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Mr. Herman.
Well, now that Mike Bonin is left, Mitch Englander's left, and Bob Bloomfield has no interest in my point of conversation, but I'm going to read this from Ms. Roybal Alward's office. This acknowledged receipt has to do with the acceptance of a complaint filed on behalf of your constituent, Mr. Armando Herman, against the City of Los Angeles Public Works. Department of Public Works has been attained to a complaint that has been forwarded to the Federal Highway Administration of California Division of Office for Investigation on behalf of Mr. Herman, and has been informed of the referral regarding access. Public access that you have not considered in your budget in protection to those who are disabled, multiple people who are hindered by the adverse budget that you cannot implement and acknowledge since 1973. It is impossible to imagine how ignorant you continue this nonsense of a no budget for the infrastructure that is the vital core to run any large city. And you hinder that. So don't be looking down at me like I made a mistake. I had to file this complaint on behalf of public interest, on behalf of the citizens of Los Angeles, so that they don't have to slip and fall in the city of Los Angeles. So I blame you for not listening, and now the U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration has heard my complaint, and they're going to take action. And again, stop violating my rights under the Brown Act. It is unconstitutional to not allow me freedom of speech, Mr. Kakarian. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
There being no other action,